right, so everyone, I'll keep it really short. Just wanted to welcome everyone to the Lively office. People streaming in right now, people listening at home. I just wanted to tell you guys I'm Peter Beerdeman. I'm the technical lead at Lively. We're a web agency that does concept, UX, development, operations for small businesses, startups, and scale-ups. We do this with a team of 15 people here in our lovely office in Amsterdam. So I just wanted to say, thank you for coming here. And if there's anything that we can help you out with, if you got some questions or you want to know more about ReactNative, feel free to shoot me a question or shoot me an email. And without further ado, our lead mobile developer, Léon Smit, give him a warm welcome.
Hello everyone, I'm Léon Smit. I'm, as Peter announced, the mobile lead here at Lively. And I'm going to talk to you about making sense of the ReactNative Navigator and our journey through a little bit of ReactNative. I will try to keep it short because I know everybody came here for the beer and pizza, so let's get on with it. In short, what I will talk about. At first, maybe not everybody knows what the Navigator is, so I will give a short refresher. Then I will talk about why we created one, and I will finish with how you can use it today. So, the Navigator. I think most of you here know what the concept of a Navigator is, but just as a refresher, a Navigator is a scene and view manager. Scene or view manager, just how you decide to call your pages. And the Navigator provides an API that allows you to transition between different scenes. So, for example, here we have a login screen of our internal mobile app. And after the login, you will want to send the user to the dashboard page. So, a Navigator provides this capability. Well, that was a short introduction to Navigators. So, why did we create one? Well, when we started with ReactNative, there was no support for React Router in ReactNative. There were other solutions, but they were specific for iOS or Android. And in short, they just did not fit our needs. So, what do I mean with that? What needs do we require from our navigators? So, for that we need a little bit of history. We have quite the background in hybrid mobile development. We started our hybrid journey with Leefplezier, which we created in Cordova and Angular. After that, we created the Meetup app, which was also in Cordova, but this time with React. And after that, we switched over to ReactNative for a couple of apps since then. But why did we switch to ReactNative? Well, we were already using React. It was already cross-platform, and it was all working super nice. The performance was acceptable because we were using Crosswalk. If maybe not all of you are familiar here with Cordova, Crosswalk enabled us to package a Chromium web view. So every app on Android would run the same. So you wouldn't have weird browser quirks that the web view had on Android. So performance was not really an issue. So why did we switch? Well, what was the problem? Well, no matter how many plugins you install in Cordova, you're still basically creating a web app. And this was noticeable. This was noticeable in a way that you had to do a lot of hacks to simulate the native experience. And also we were creating universal apps. So for example, Leefplezier we designed in an iOS user interface. And because it's very difficult to separate these two platforms without creating two code bases, we also shipped this UI to Android. So at this point you alienate maybe half of your audience or half of your user base, because people on Android, users on Android, have different expectations for the UI and interactions with this app. So then what is this native experience that we were trying to achieve? Well, high performance for once. The first thing is high performance, smooth animations, but the most important thing for us is to utilize native UI patterns. And as our designers would say, it has to feel right. It has to feel like a native app. So, what are these patterns? Well, for example, here we have an iOS and Android app. You see the iOS app transitions differently from one scene to the next than the Android app. And this is not uncommon in a lot of native Android and iOS apps. This is what a user expects of these. A user has a certain mental map of how an app should behave on a mobile device. So it's only natural that you adapt this behavior. Sorry. Okay. A thing like back navigation. On iOS, you can navigate back using gestures. On Android, you utilize the back button. If an Android user has a similar, or if you implement the iOS way on Android, a user won't immediately understand that he can navigate back using gestures. So you want to utilize the back button. And a thing like tab navigation. On iOS, tabs switch instantly without any animation, but a common UI pattern on Android is that you can use gestures to go from one tab to the next. Okay, those are a few UI patterns that we want to utilize in our app, and yeah, well, with Cordova, we just weren't able to do this. Not as easy as with ReactNative. So, now the challenge. How can we use a single code base to provide this native experience? Because we still wanted this single code base that we could work on and ship it to two different platforms. So I will now explain to you a bit how we approached this the first time, and then after that I will explain how we improved on that. And so first off, you would start with configuring a bunch of your routes, maybe like this. After that, you would implement the Navigator and provide an initial route, provide a render scene method, and the component that you provided with the route would be rendered here in the render scene method. But then you want to implement the back navigation and then you would want to implement native transitions. For iOS, this is the push from right. So you would expect a user would expect a scene to be animated in from the right, and Android would just have a fade-in animation. And then maybe you will implement a back navigation, and so ReactNative provides a good API for that, and you have to make sure that on the bottom you have I have a handle back press. ReactNative provides a good API for handling the back button. You can just attach an event listener and then handle the back press, but you still have to figure out if you're on the root scene, because if you always return true in the event handler, then your app will never be able to close using the back button. So these are a couple of quirks that you have to figure out. And then there is the navigation bar. The navigation bar is managed from within the Navigator, so you have to provide it inside the Navigator, and then you have to provide it with left buttons and right buttons. But if you want to render a different left button or right button for a different scene, how are you going to do this in this view? It's quite hard, and you have to do a lot of configuration in, for example, these routes. Maybe you would provide the left button here next to your component, but then you have the issue that you cannot do anything with your navigation bar within your scene. So you would have to create two components, one for the navigation bar, one for the scene, and maybe if you have a search bar in this navigation bar, then how would you provide the search query to the view? So there are a lot of things to consider. And then there is the tab navigator. Well, this is an entirely different story because unlike the navigator, the navigator is a single API for both platforms, but the tab navigator, for example, you have to implement this the native way. You have to use for iOS the tab bar iOS, and for Android the view pager for Android. And so, what's wrong with this method? Well, first thing, it's very tedious. It's very error prone because if you do this across a lot of different projects, then you will create a lot of inconsistency in your code base, and then things like bug fixing would be just very much more difficult, much more time consuming. There are lots of different ways to accomplish this, and you get just for transitioning between two scenes, you get all this code. So, what can we do about this to make this simpler and faster process? So we did what any lazy programmer would do. We created a package. We created an abstraction layer on top of this navigator, and the tab navigator and the view pager for Android. So our ReactNative scene navigator provides out-of-the-box native platform-specific transitions with native UI patterns, which was very important for us. It's highly customizable, but the important thing is it can only be set up in one way. Namely, the navigator is reduced to this amount of code. The same thing I just showed you, all the very long amount of code can be accomplished with only these lines. Then there's the tab navigator, which has a similar API and utilizes the scene component and renders these icons for the tab bar. If you provide a title, it renders a title. It's just very intuitive, and maybe some of you have noticed, but our API is based on React Router. So we were familiar with this, so people that were creating React apps, web apps for us, internally could transition to React Native and have no problem configuring an app from scratch. And then there's the navigation bar. Well, within your component, you just attach a navigation bar to the navigator, and then you could use a search bar, for example, from within your scene. So, and it's customizable, for example, for iOS. Well, you can do a lot of things to create it to your own needs. Here I changed a couple of colors. I added titles to the bottom bar, and maybe the navigation bar is a little bit different. For Android, the same thing. You can do whatever you like, but the benefit is we can only set it up in one way and just style it to our needs. So, there are a lot of developments in the past couple of months, maybe a year. Why do we still use it? Well, for us, it just works. For one thing, it just works. It's battle tested in multiple apps. We know it from the inside and out, and it's fast to set up. This example, all these examples I gave you were from a demo app I created in only 20 minutes. So you can imagine how quickly, how powerful this is for us. So that we can create a navigatable UI in just 20 minutes. So the roadmap for our React Native C Navigator. Oh, I thought they would come in one at a time, but okay. We want to add more customizable, okay, difficult word, the top one. We want to be able to, for example, be able to change the navigation bar for the tab navigation bar for iOS. That's really very rigid API at the moment, so I don't know how we are going to do it, but we are working on it. We want to rewrite it to TypeScript, and as you may have noticed, we used the Navigator component from React, and that's been deprecated a couple of React versions ago. So we are in the process of writing this out in the 2.0 version. So where can you find this? Well, you can try it out with Yarn. You can find it on GitHub. And I hope you give feedback on our GitHub page and maybe contribute. Thank you for your attention. I am Léon. You can find us, you can find again the Navigator at GitHub. And a side note, we're also hiring. We need React Native developers. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Léon. Since we have quite loose schedule, we can do a few questions, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay.
So raise your hand if you want to ask questions.
I was wondering if React Native code that you've written is in some way isomorphic that you can reuse for the website or for
well, in theory you could, but then we would have to write out the need for views, maybe rewrite it to divs or something, but it's an interesting thought, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
There are some developments on React Native for web, and as far as I know, Twitter Lite, the mobile web version of Twitter, is already running on production using React Native for web. Nicholas Gallagher, the main developer from there, been like having more talks. Yeah, I think he had actually talks from React conferences in the US. So you can look for that. More questions?
You mentioned React Router, and probably it's kind of an alternative to what you created. Have you tried to compare it to React Router, and what is more performance?
Well, what I understand from React Router, the native version, it's only state management. It's only it doesn't provide transitions like we do. So no, I have not made the comparison yet. But I mentioned it because it's our go-to solution for routing in the browser. So that was the first thing we wanted for our app, but couldn't use. So I don't know if I don't think I can answer your question.
So with React Router, the experience would be different.
Yeah, very different. Yes, React Router doesn't provide these native UI patterns. I think I don't know for sure, but I think you have to do a lot of coding like we did in the first demo, in the first example, to accomplish this. So yeah.
There's a question.
You mentioned that it's also depreciated, the navigators. How does that work?
Well, I think in React Native 0.43 or something, they deprecated their custom React Native Navigator, and that we still use, but they deprecated in a way, they separated it from React Native, and it's its own package right now. So we can still use it, but it isn't very, it's not as efficient with native with native animations as the modern solution, because there is another library. I'm not sure what the name is, but
React Navigation, maybe?
yeah, I think so. Yes, yeah. They also recommend that you use that solution right now, but again, we tried it, but it's very rigid still, and you still have to build your navigation bars in the same way as we did, as I explained in the example. And that's something, we just can't do because we want to do more custom things. So, yeah.
More questions?
I have a question. I'm not a React developer or React Native. I'm looking for reasons to pick it up. And if I'm going to do a comparison, let's compare to Xamarin. So what's like the difference? Is there like, would I choose one of the two?
I don't know what Xamarin is, so no. Maybe you can explain?
From what I get, I think it's the same. You write in C#, you write on one code base native format for iOS, whatever, Android.
Yeah, well, it's mostly for us. We are all JavaScript developers, so for us the benefit lies in our experience with React for Web. So we can apply those skills mostly to React Native. So in that way, it's very beneficial for us. We get high performing apps running on JavaScript, but using native components. So maybe that's
because from what I get, is it true that does this deliver like native performing apps?
Yeah, we can say that.
You do it in 20 minutes. You show.
No, only because we created an abstraction layer. The first time we did this, we took a very long time to figure all the Lego pieces to fit them all together, and that resulted in React Native Navigator, C Navigator.
Okay.
And so now we can use this package in our project to set up a skeleton, a basic app very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just reusing things we learned from previous projects and using them in this one.
For me, it's just pure interest. I want to compare because.
Maybe after the second talk we can compare code or something, and we can talk about it.
I don't have any code with me.
No, okay, but we can talk about it over a beer, okay?
It's actually a good example of a pitch. So remember, I've been encouraging to have a pitch. So if you have like a global question like this, like in general, how React Native is better than alternatives like Xamarin or other. So that's an example of a good pitch. So we had like a freestyle pitch here. So if somebody wants to convince,
please.
you're a native developer, right?
Yeah.
Native developer, right?
Well,
Android
basically,
or
I'm not even. Basically, I'm just a whatever C++, C#, .NET
okay.
developer, whatever. Not that, but I want to be blown away. I think I will be.
So here's at least some holy word for you.
Nice.
All right, thanks, Léon. We now proceed with the second talk. Randa will also be talking about navigation and more details about the content.
Heel goed gedaan, man.
Oh, you have the microphone.
Doe niet met vast in het publiek.
You're switching microphones, right?
Oh, sorry.
It's switching.
Yeah, we're switching, yeah. You quickly pull this onto your shirt. Just go like this.
Should I go with my...
Yeah. Okay, you can just put this in your back pocket or something. That's awesome. Good luck, man.
Thank you.